The first thing Karen did was step onto my driveway tarp, wrinkle her nose, and ask whether I was hosting an unauthorized construction camp. I told her no. Then I asked why she was standing on it. My name is Ethan Cole, and the tarp in question was not mysterious. It was a heavy red waterproof sheet spread across one side of my driveway to protect the concrete, while I refinished an old wooden cabinet for my daughter. I had sandpaper, 2 paint cans, and a folding worktable sitting on top of it, all arranged neatly enough that even a surgeon could have found the tools without asking directions. The cabinet had belonged to my late wife, Rachel. She had used it in our first apartment, and our daughter Sophie wanted it restored for her new bedroom before she left for college. The finish was cracked, one hinge was bent, and years of storage had turned the wood dull. But Sophie still remembered Rachel keeping photo albums inside it. So I was fixing it. That should have been the whole story. Instead, Denise Harrow arrived in a white golf cart with gold HOA lettering on the side, carrying a tablet and the expression of someone who had just discovered a carnival operating without her permission. Denise was president of Crestview Manor, a neighborhood where porch cushions had approved color families and residents were once warned not to display emotionally aggressive pumpkins. She stopped at the curb, looked at the red tarp, and visibly recoiled. "Ethan," she said, "what is that?" I glanced down at it. "A tarp. I can see that. Then this meeting is going better than expected." Her mouth tightened. Denise wore a pale blue blazer, white slacks, and oversized sunglasses that made every conversation feel like a disciplinary hearing at a luxury resort. She walked halfway up the driveway, carefully avoiding a paintbrush as if it might attack her ankles. "This tarp is visible from the street," she said. "It creates a temporary worksite appearance." "I am temporarily working. That does not make the appearance acceptable." Sophie stepped out of the garage carrying a box of brass handles. "It's protecting the driveway." Denise gave her a thin smile. "Protection can be handled in a more refined manner." I folded my arms. How refined does a floor covering need to be? Denise opened her tablet and read from the rules. Section 7. Paragraph F prohibits exposed tarps, drop cloths, utility coverings, protective sheets, construction fabrics, and temporary ground coverings in front-facing areas when they create visual disruption. I've been working for 90 minutes. The rule does not include a grace period for unattractive materials. That sentence made Sophie stop beside me. Denise tapped the screen again and turned it toward me. The violation was $200, with $75 added each day the tarp remained visible. I had 24 hours to remove it, relocate the project, or replace the covering with an approved decorative surface. I looked at the fine, then at the cabinet. "This is for my daughter." Denise's voice softened by perhaps 0.5%. "Family photo projects are admirable, but they still require proper presentation." Sophie held the box of handles tighter. "My mom owned this cabinet." Denise glanced at her, then back at the tarp. "Sentimental value does not improve curb appeal." There it was, the sentence that ended my interest in being polite. I took the violation notice and folded it once, slowly. "So the tarp itself is the problem?" "The tarp is ugly," Denise said. "It makes your driveway look unfinished and chaotic. And if it looked intentional..." She gave a small, confident shrug. "Decorative driveway displays are judged differently, provided they are tasteful, temporary, and properly presented." Tasteful. Temporary. properly presented. I looked down at the bright red tarp stretching across the driveway. In the afternoon sunlight, it suddenly did not look like a drop cloth anymore. It looked long, dramatic, and surprisingly close to something celebrities walked across while cameras flashed. A red carpet. Sophie followed my gaze, then looked at me. She knew that expression. "Dad," she said carefully, "what are you thinking?" I smiled. If you're watching Sovereign Verdict, subscribe now, because Denise Harrow had just called my driveway tarp ugly and accidentally given me the perfect theme. She wanted proper presentation, so I was going to give Crestview Manor a movie premiere. That evening, after Sophie went upstairs, I stayed in the garage staring at the red tarp. The cabinet sat safely in the middle of it, half-sanded and covered in memories. Every scratch in the wood reminded me of a different chapter of our lives. Rachel had bought it from a thrift store when we were newly married, proudly announcing that good furniture deserves a second chance. She had been right about that. Now it looked like the cabinet, and apparently the tarp beneath it, needed another chance too. I carried Denise's violation notice into the kitchen, made myself a fresh pot of coffee, and opened the Crestview Manor HOA handbook. 341 pages. There were regulations about mailbox landscaping, porch decor, seasonal wreath sizes, driveway edging, and decorative lighting. Somewhere in those pages was the sentence Denise had used to fine me. But I wasn't looking for her rule anymore. I was looking for mine. About an hour later, buried deep inside the Community Enhancement section, I found it. Section 14, Paragraph C. Decorative event displays, temporary ceremonial installations, community celebration features, themed hospitality decor, and artistic presentation areas may be displayed for limited periods when maintained in an orderly condition and not operated for commercial purposes. I leaned back in my chair. Decorative event displays, temporary ceremonial installations, artistic presentation areas. The tarp wasn't the problem. It simply needed a better story. The next morning, Sophie found me sketching ideas on graph paper. She looked over my shoulder, then laughed before I said a word. "Is that a limousine?" "Maybe." "And those are velvet ropes." "Possibly." She pointed to the drawing. "Dad, are we turning the driveway into a movie premiere?" I looked up. "I was hoping you'd say that." Within an hour, I called my oldest friend, Caleb. Caleb owned an event rental company that supplied decorations for weddings, galas, charity fundraisers, and corporate events. More importantly, he possessed absolutely no instinct for moderation. When I explained Denise's violation, he became strangely quiet. Then he asked one question: Hollywood or Oscars? I didn't realize there was a difference. There absolutely is. By Saturday morning, Caleb's delivery truck rolled into my driveway, loaded with decorative stanchions, velvet ropes, elegant gold posts, oversized spotlights, artificial palm trees, folding directors' chairs, battery-powered uplighting, and an enormous backdrop printed to resemble a glamorous movie premiere entrance. Sophie walked around the truck with wide eyes. She is going to lose her mind. Caleb grinned. That's the business model. We didn't remove the tarp. That was the important part. Instead, we centered everything around it. The bright red tarp became the red carpet. Gold stanchions lined both sides from the sidewalk to the garage. Decorative floodlights pointed upward toward the house. 2 artificial palm trees framed the entrance, while a tasteful backdrop stood behind the cabinet reading, "The Cole Premiere, one night only, restoring family memories." Sophie insisted on adding a small sign beneath it. Paparazzi welcome Hoa complaints by appointment. Caleb laughed so hard he nearly dropped one of the velvet ropes. The finishing touch was my favorite. Instead of hiding Rachel's old cabinet, we placed it proudly at the end of the red carpet, like it was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. Beside it sat framed family photographs showing Rachel using the cabinet over the years. Suddenly, the driveway didn't resemble a work site anymore. It looked like an elegant outdoor tribute wrapped inside a Hollywood movie premiere. Mrs. Alvarez wandered over from next door carrying lemonade. She stopped at the sidewalk. "Nolan?" "My name's Ethan." She laughed. "Sorry." "Ethan, this may be the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen." I smiled. "In a good way?" She looked around again. "In an expensive way." At exactly 8:22 Monday morning, Denise's white golf cart slowed to a stop in front of my house. She stepped out confidently, tablet already in her hand. Then she looked up. The red tarp was still there. Only now it stretched beneath velvet ropes like the entrance to an awards ceremony. Decorative lights framed the driveway. Palm trees stood proudly on either side. The cabinet rested at the end of the carpet beneath elegant lighting, surrounded by family photographs celebrating its history. Denise removed her sunglasses, read the backdrop, read it again, then slowly looked at me. "Ethan?" I smiled. "Good morning." She pointed toward the driveway. "What is all this?" I took a sip of coffee. "A temporary ceremonial installation." Her eye twitched. "It looks like a movie premiere." I nodded. "Presentation matters." She stared at me for several long seconds, then she quietly reached for her tablet. "I'll see you tonight." I smiled. "I'll put you on the guest list." By 7 o'clock, the Crestview Manor clubhouse was fuller than anyone had seen it in months. Word had spread through the neighborhood before lunchtime. Photos of my driveway had bounced through text messages, Facebook groups, and neighborhood chats until people weren't asking whether I had violated the rules anymore. They were asking what time the premiere started. Caleb leaned toward me as we walked inside, carrying a binder. "I've catered charity galas with smaller crowds." Sophie smiled. "I told you people like movies." The room buzzed with conversation until Denise Harrow entered through the side door carrying her tablet. She wore a cream blazer with a gold brooch and the same expression she'd worn when she fined my tarp. She clearly expected this meeting to end quickly. Then she looked around. Nearly every seat was filled. Mrs. Alvarez waved cheerfully from the second row. Mr. Donnelly, who never attended HOA meetings, sat in the back eating popcorn from a paper bag. Even several board members seemed unusually curious instead of annoyed. Denise struck the gavel. "This emergency architectural hearing concerns Lot 22. Homeowner Ethan Cole has responded to a driveway tarp violation by constructing what appears to be a theatrical event venue." I stood calmly. "I prefer temporary ceremonial installation." A few neighbors chuckled. Denise ignored them. "Mr. Cole, do you deny that the red tarp remains in full public view?" "No," she smiled confidently. "Then we're making progress." I opened my binder and handed copies of the highlighted covenant to each board member. "The tarp remains. The violation does not." Richard, the board treasurer, adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the page. "Section 14, decorative event displays." Beside him, landscaping chair Linda continued reading aloud. "Temporary ceremonial installations, community celebration features, themed hospitality decor, artistic presentation areas." She looked up. "That language is certainly here." Denise leaned forward. The intent was tasteful seasonal displays. It doesn't actually say seasonal, I replied. It says temporary. Richard looked back at the photographs projected onto the screen. I have to admit, it's surprisingly organized. Denise immediately turned toward him. Richard. I'm simply making an observation, Caleb whispered under his breath. He's becoming my favorite person. Denise pressed another button on her tablet, enlarging one photograph. The red carpet stretched perfectly through the driveway. Velvet ropes framed both sides. Decorative lights illuminated the old cabinet while family of photographs stood neatly arranged beside it. The artificial palm trees made the whole display look absurdly convincing. It resembles a commercial event, Denise argued. I shook my head. There isn't a single business logo. No tickets. No advertising. No sales. No sponsors. Just a family project presented creatively. Sophie quietly stood and carried one framed photograph to the board table. It showed my wife Rachel sitting beside the cabinet nearly 15 years earlier, smiling while holding 2-year-old Sophie in her lap. The room became noticeably quieter. Mom loved this cabinet, Sophie said softly. She kept every family photo inside it. When Dad started restoring it, the tarp was only there to protect the driveway. She looked toward Denise. You called it ugly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. I didn't think protecting memories was ugly. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Linda gently placed the photograph on the table. I didn't realize the cabinet meant this much. It does, I replied. The tarp was never the project. The cabinet was. The driveway just became part of the story. Denise straightened her papers. Sentimental value does not change architectural compliance. Before she could continue, the clubhouse doors opened. Caleb looked over his shoulder and smiled. Perfect timing. Everyone turned. Walking inside was Amanda Pierce, director of the city's annual Arts and Heritage Festival, followed by local newspaper editor Frank Ellis carrying a camera around his neck. Denise stared at both of them. Why is the newspaper here? I smiled politely. Because apparently, my movie premiere has attracted some press. Amanda Pierce smiled as she walked to the front of the room, completely unaware that she had just made Denise Harrow's evening dramatically worse. She carried a folder with the City Arts and Heritage Festival logo on the front, while Frank Ellis adjusted the camera hanging from his neck and quietly looked around the packed clubhouse. It wasn't every day a homeowners association meeting attracted a newspaper photographer, and judging by Frank's grin, he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Denise cleared her throat. Ms. Pierce, this is an internal HOA architectural hearing. Amanda nodded politely. I understand. Mr. Cole contacted me because he said he had created a temporary ceremonial display celebrating the restoration of a family heirloom. Since our festival promotes creative neighborhood art and historical preservation, I was curious to see it myself. She opened the folder and placed several photographs on the table. I visited the property this afternoon. Linda immediately picked up one of the photos. The evening sunlight reflected off the velvet ropes, while the old cabinet stood proudly at the end of the red carpet. The family photographs surrounding it made the entire display feel less like a joke and more like a celebration of memories. Amanda smiled. What impressed me wasn't the decorations. It was the story. She looked toward Sophie. A daughter preserving something her mother loved. A father turning a restoration project into a celebration instead of hiding it. That's exactly the kind of creativity our festival encourages. Frank stepped forward next. I've covered community events for 18 years. He lifted his camera slightly. When I saw the driveway this afternoon, I assumed there was an actual event taking place. The room laughed, but after Mr. Cole explained the idea, I stayed nearly 40 minutes. I watched neighbors stop, smile, introduce themselves, and start conversations. He looked around the clubhouse. Most neighborhoods spend years trying to create that kind of community interaction. Ethan managed it with one tarp and a little imagination. Denise folded her arms. It is still a tarp. Frank nodded. Technically. But that's not what people see. They see a family celebrating memories. Amanda reached into her folder once more. Our festival committee meets every spring looking for creative neighborhood displays. She slid a brochure across the table. We'd like to invite the Cole family to participate in this year's Heritage Home Showcase. Richard looked surprised. That's a city event. It is, Amanda replied. We think the restoration display fits perfectly. The room erupted into whispers. Denise looked from the brochure to the photographs and back again. For the first time all evening, she seemed to realize that the conversation had completely slipped beyond her control. I stood and looked toward the board. My wife bought that cabinet when we had almost nothing. We couldn't afford expensive furniture, but she always said beautiful things weren't defined by price. When Sophie asked me to restore it before college, I wanted to do it properly. The tarp was there to protect the driveway. You called it ugly. So instead of hiding the project, we celebrated it. I paused for a moment before continuing. Sometimes presentation doesn't mean pretending something isn't happening. Sometimes presentation means giving people a reason to stop and appreciate what's happening. The room remained silent for several seconds. Then Linda slowly closed her folder. I moved to dismiss the violation against Lot 22 and approve the Cole movie premiere installation as a temporary ceremonial display under Section 14, Paragraph C, to remain until the cabinet restoration is complete. Richard smiled before raising his hand. I second. Another board member, Melissa, who had been quiet all evening, raised her hand immediately afterward. I support the motion. Denise looked around the table in disbelief. This encourages people to decorate construction projects. Richard shrugged gently. No. It encourages people to read the rules as carefully as the HOA does. A wave of laughter rolled through the clubhouse. All in favor? Linda asked. 3 hands went up without hesitation. Denise's hand stayed firmly on the table. The motion passes, Linda announced. The violation is dismissed, and the display is approved as a temporary artistic ceremonial installation. The applause started in the front row and quickly spread through the entire room. Sophie wrapped her arms around me while Caleb leaned over and whispered, Congratulations. You're officially the only man I know who turned a driveway tarp into a red carpet premiere. 2 weeks later, the cabinet was finally finished. The walnut finish gleamed under the afternoon sun. Every brass handle shined like new. And Rachel's old photographs were neatly returned to the drawers where they belonged. Before carrying it inside, Sophie asked if we could leave it at the end of the red carpet for one final evening. Neighbors came by throughout the night. They signed a small guest book Caleb had placed on the hostess stand, shared stories about family heirlooms, and took photographs with Sophie beside the restored cabinet. Frank's newspaper even ran a feature titled, The Driveway That Turned Memories into a Movie Premiere, and Amanda officially included the display in the city's Heritage Home Showcase. As for Denise, she never mentioned my driveway tarp again. Every time she drove past my house afterward, she slowed just enough to glance toward the driveway before continuing on. The tarp eventually disappeared, exactly as planned, but the restored cabinet remained inside our home, carrying another chapter of family history. So remember this from Sovereign Verdict. Subscribe for more stories, read every HOA rule twice, and never let an HOA Karen tell you your driveway tarp is ugly, because with enough imagination, it might just become the most talked about red carpet movie premiere your neighborhood has ever seen.